John McMullen was there, and he joins us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline, brought to you by Harrah's Resort and Bally's Atlantic City Wild Wild West. They're taking bets at their sports book. Wager today at the book. Break up with your bookie. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. And, John, it seemed that the Giants were just what the doctor ordered, and the Eagles really took advantage right from the onset, really.
Yeah, really, second play of the game, second offensive play of the game, set the tone, and that's when Jordan Hicks deflects the ball to Camus, Grugier Hill, and you're off and running. And I talked about it all week. I wanted to see the Eagles start quickly. That's been an issue this year. I don't think the scripted stuff has worked as well as it has in the past, which I think has been a big issue. But in this case, it's the defense that comes through. They get the short field, and they're able to take advantage of it. And that first touchdown, though, that was a no, yes throw by Carson Wentz, thrown across his body to the middle of the field. But New York Giants, whew, that's a bad football team.
Yeah, and a lot of people have been asking, were the Eagles, did they get right last night because they got right, or did they get right because they played a lesser opponent? And I tend to think in the NFL, yes, there are bad teams, but you still got to execute and go, and go full force against. You can't go half-ass against the Giants just because they're not very good and expect to beat them.
No, we talk about that all the time in the NFL. They have some very good players, and if you're not on your A game, anybody can sort of jump up and bite you. So you got to give the Eagles credit. All you can do is play who's in front of you. But this was the perfect opponent at the perfect time for a team that maybe was questioning themselves a little bit coming into this game. But you do have to give them credit for getting it done. And I think if you want to look at it from the Eagles' perspective, the best things to me were they played a clean game, which has been some of the issues, and the constant references of shooting themselves in the foot and the unforced errors, by and large, were gone. So I thought that was positive. And then the situational football, which they were brilliant in last season en route to the Super Bowl, it was back. The third down, Carson Wentz's numbers were unbelievable. His red zone numbers, that's where the Eagles dominated last season. They got back to that against the New York Giants. I don't know how much we can take out of it. I think that will be sort of that story will be told over the next two games with Carolina and Jacksonville, but this is a positive start.
And I know that you're saying we don't know how much we could take out, but the execution part, the penalties, wiping those out. I mean, we kept asking the question during the week, what if they just simply cleaned all that up? What would the results be? And maybe we saw what the result would be last night.
Yeah, that as I said, that to me was the biggest positive, just the fact that it was a relatively clean game and there wasn't all the, lining up wrong, pre-snap penalties.
And what is that from? Is that more of a sense of urgency? Is that more like, hey, is that a looking in the mirror? When a team – because a lot of times we say this team's on discipline. That's on the coaching. And then when they're disciplined, what changes?
I think it was a look in the mirror game because so many players said that. And Doug said that after the Vikings game. It was a look in the mirror game because I do think that the reason they lost that game was a bunch of unforced errors and things that, it's one thing if you look at the opponent and sometimes you tip your cap to them and they outplay you and you go on to the next one. I don't think the Eagles felt that way after the Minnesota game, and they felt like they made too many mistakes, and to their credit, they cleaned them up on a very short week.
Yeah, was that a surprising? I mean, the way that they coming off the short week and these Thursday night games can be really sloppy. Which the game was last night was sloppy, but I think that was 80% the Giants. The fact that Doug looked tired last week. This team looked like they had maybe lost some confidence. That they got back on the field 4 days later and looked like a completely different football team. Is that a credit to Doug? Is that a credit to these, these players in that locker room, this team that is a current champion, saying, look, we're better than this?
Yeah, I thought it was a credit to the players more than the coaching staff, not to criticize the coaching staff. One of the things that interested me after the game, I was talking to Malcolm Jenkins, and he said this was their most complicated game plan from a defensive standpoint from all year, which shocked me in a short week. You would think the opposite. Maybe it was the familiar opponent. But the players kind of challenged themselves because from their standpoint, they do think it has been execution issues, making mistakes, hasn't been the coaching. And I talked about it last week. I don't think Doug was tired. I thought he was frustrated, and some of the frustration was lifted because the Eagles got back to some of their old ways as far as success. And I think you can't understate what I said, the tone-setting play. Second offensive play of the game, boom, you're off and running. It was important to get an early lead. And the Eagles, like most teams, but even more so, they just play a whole heck of a lot better when they're playing from the lead.
They do, and a lot of it was the perception that, hey, if you look at the end of the night, the run pass. I know that we talked a lot about this, and you're laughing about it, but that was very equal last night. But those numbers those numbers might be deceiving.
Yes, it's skewed. Play.
I set it up for you. I set it up for you.
It amuses me. You know how I feel about this. The Eagles won the football game, and that's why they ran it. How many times they run it towards the end of the game? And you look, if you're just going to look at those black and white numbers at the end of the game, you're going to say, oh, look at the run-pass ratio. But the assumption to make the leap that if you just do that, you're going to win every football game is silly. And I've been saying this time and time and time again. Yes, when you win football games, it's going to look better because that's where you are. And when you lose football games, it's not going to look as good because what are you doing? You're fighting and clawing to try to get back in the game. Anybody who looks at this team, anybody who looks at this league, anybody who looks at Carson Wentz, that's the guy on this team. That's the MVP candidate. That's the face of the franchise. That's the guy you want the ball in the hands of. And that run-pass ratio stuff, it turns out the way everybody wants it, as I say. Mm-hmm. Philadelphia's stuck in the time warp of 1975. You can only look at it after the game and say you like it. But right. To assume you're going to like that ratio, if you're down, I don't know, 24-10 next week, you're going to be pretty upset if Carson Wentz isn't slinging the football in the fourth quarter.
He did sling it last night. He found 8 different receivers, Alshon Jeffrey. Nelson Aguilar, he had a lot of yards last night, but really I thought it was interesting the way he got that tipped ball in the air. It kind of falls right to him. He catches it, and then, boom, you see how much speed he has when he took off with that thing. But I was laughing. I said, that might be the kind of wonky play that finally gets him going.
Yeah, really, there were the two plays where, and the other big play he had when Carson kind of rolled out and just waited and waited and waited and waited and waited. And finally, there was a broken coverage and Nelson was wide open, and they got another big play. But, hey, I've been disappointed in Nelson's season to this point. I didn't see much change. Just it was a nice awareness play when Carson's arm gets hit and that ball looks like it's going to be intercepted. And Carson said after the game he was sure Landon Collins was going to get it, but Landon didn't recognize it. Nelson did. So you have to give him credit for that. But overall, I still think that's one guy who we talked about a lot of how many guys had career years last season. Nelson's one of them. He's got to get back to that level. I haven't seen him at that level, even though the numbers look good yesterday.
Offensively, I'm interested to get your take on the running. I know they ran 31 times, not for a lot of yards, but 31 carries, 18 from Smallwood, 11 from Corey. did they see enough? I know that Corey and Howie had a little exchange last night. Did they see enough from their running backs and their rushing attack to say, Howie, you don't need to pick up the phone?
Well, I don't know, because Corey was on a pitch count. So I think it changes. It sort of flips, and Corey gets the Wendell Smallwood touches moving forward now that he's back. And Wendell will be in the secondary role now. I like Corey Clement as a player. I think if you're talking to me about the trade markets, I would be looking at wide receiver, safety, maybe even left tackle, depending on how Jason Peters is effective, although there are no left tackles on the market. I think there's a lot more issues than running back if Corey Clement's on the field. I really do. And you just saw one of the most explosive guys you're ever going to see in Saquon Barkley. And let's be honest, that team stinks. There's only so much you can do as a running back in this league. I think Corey's a great fit for this offense. I think assets could be better spent at different positions, especially when you see the injuries starting to pile up.
Yep, you got obviously a lot of questions in this 10-day span, because now it gives Howie some extra time to maybe do something and incorporate somebody. So the trade deadline's on the 30th, John. Would this be the week that if they don't do something that they most likely wouldn't?
Well, as you said, if you want to get somebody out there as quickly as possible, having a few extra days is a little bit better. But let's be honest, I mean, that's not going to make much of a difference anyway. So it doesn't matter. You don't have to get it done this week. They could get something done, as you mentioned, October 30th. It could be later as well. I think it's just about finding the best fit. Ultimately, I think they're going to do something. It's just a matter of what position, what fit, and when you can get it done. Remember, there's two sides of this. Just because you want to get it done maybe this week doesn't mean the other side is on the same page. So I do think something's going to happen, but I don't think there's any urgency yet to get it done this week.
Okay. With that, let me ask you this. Jason Peters, I don't know that you can. I mean, let's first ask about Peters. This is the guy has a bicep injury, but apparently he's going to try to play through it, which kind of would say I don't know how much I can count on him. He's off the field, 20% of the time, seemingly anyway. So, offensive line, is that an area where they potentially need some help? Secondary, they lost Sidney Jones last night. They're already without Corey Graham. Is that an area? If there's the most pressing area, where do you see it?
Well, that's interesting. Most pressing, maybe safety, especially because Sidney Jones is going to be out for at least a week, and we'll see how that goes. When Doug uses the terminology week to week, that guarantees he's not going to be back this week. So you just hope it's a 1 week thing. But anytime you talk about a hamstring and a guy who runs fast, that could be an issue real quickly. You've seen how long Darren Sproles has been out. So now Avonte Maddox, who, by the way, has done an unbelievable job, moving from outside corner at Pitt to nickel corner here. Then he's forced to play safety. Now there's another injury, and he's forced to go back into nickel corner. He's been amazing, but you have all the dominoes falling. They had to force Rasul Douglas back to play safety. So I don't know how you can be comfortable there. I would say that or what I've talked about a lot, speed receiver. Those are the two biggest needs to me. You need a left tackle. Jason Peters can't go, but there are no left tackles. So that to me is sort of, you need it, but you're not going to be able to get anybody better than Vaitai.
You mentioned Douglas. I find this interesting because somebody tweeted, maybe it was John Clark, I don't remember, but saying that Rasul had not played safety in college, and he responded that he did, in fact, play safety in college. Now, I watched a lot of those West Virginia games. I don't remember him playing a whole heck of a lot of safety, if he did at all. I tried to look back
didn't.
through the database to see if he had snaps there, and nothing shows that he did. Now, he's insinuating that he did. I don't know if that's his way of saying to Corey Unlin or anybody, hey, put me at safety. I'll play it if you need me. But is he a viable option moving forward?
It was actually Jimmy Kempski, so I'll give him the credit. He got in a little Twitter war. But, Rasul,
that's surprising from Kempski.
What Rasul meant was that he's played the position in practice. He's played it for a few plays here and there. I've talked to him about it.
Okay.
He's always said he's capable of doing it. But it tells you, I mean, look, one of my favorite quotes in the history of football is by Tom Moore, who was a longtime offensive assistant, most famous for working as the coordinator for Peyton Manning in Indianapolis. And somebody asked him why you don't practice a little bit more with the backup to get him reps at the quarterback. And he said, basically, if we don't practice a curse word, F-U word, we don't practice, and it's number 18 isn't practicing, we're you-know-what. I've always thought that was one of the funniest things. And that's a similar thing with every position. And Avonte Maddox is another indication. Avonte didn't take one snap at safety in the offseason, during the season, until they were forced into it by injuries. And he's handled it extremely well. Same thing with Rasul. He has not taken one snap at safety before yesterday's game in practice in the offseason. But that's what the NFL is. You got 46 guys on game day, and sometimes you're forced into positions that you're not used to. Now they need him back there, most likely, at least for a week. He'll be getting reps back there. But that's sort of just the way the NFL is.
Yeah. Real quick on, they win last night. They look pretty impressive, and obviously they beat a team that's got all sorts of issues. You were there last night. Is it as bad as it seems for the Giants?
Yeah, it's pretty bad. I mean, look, you can say this about life, forget about football. If you make decisions based on emotion, you're in trouble. And that's what the Giants have been doing for years with Eli Manning. And I don't understand the fact that you seem to have these two camps and everything's mutually exclusive. You can say, thank you, Eli. You've done tremendous things for this organization. You've helped them win 2 Super Bowl championships. And you can also say, but you can't play at the level we need you to play at any longer. And I had to move on. And I tweeted today, Saquon Barkley just looks unbelievable. And it just doesn't matter. They should have took the quarterback. You see where they are with Saquon Barkley. Mm-hmm. They're 1-5. They're one of the worst teams in football. And it's not a criticism of him. It's just the reality of this league and the value of that position, of the quarterback position. So the Giants are where they are because they've made decisions for more than 1 year now based on emotion and based on moving forward with Eli Manning. And remember, Mike, there's some revisionist history now because now it's the goalposts have moved and they said, well, now we can have Barkley and get a top-tier quarterback. But remember, the argument for taking Barkley was Eli still had a window. And if you just put great players around them, they could be competitive again. Well, that's been proven false. That part of it has been proven false. So now you have to morph into the Sixers-like tank and hope you can get a quarterback next year in the draft. But guess what? That generational running back might win you a game or two and screw you out as a quarterback. So you can't go sort of the NBA route in the NFL, nor should you ever, because the talent is so even. New York Giants, no matter.
By the way, I agree with that.
Yeah, New York Giants made
but
awful
for my basketball views, I agree on football. You can't play that way in football.
No, exactly. And it is revisionist, and now they're changing their tune because it's pretty clear. Hey, one thing, you can lie to fans. You can even lie to some media members if you're an NFL organization, some who are not as savvy as others. You cannot lie to the players. The New York Giants have some good players. It starts with Saquon, starts with OBJ. You see the frustration, and it emanates throughout the entire locker room. They know the on-field leader can't play. They know it.
Yeah, and I think the
shows
misconception
up in the rest of the game.
I think the misconception, what I hear a lot of people saying, that if the Giants drafted a guy at number 2, what does that change? Maybe they're not good this year. We're not saying if you draft a quarterback you're going to be a playoff team immediately. No. But what it does is at least advances the organization quicker. I mean, at least gets that guy a year of experience under his belt, and now you can find out what you need to put around that player. I sent a tweet to you. How many great running backs have we seen in this league that have been buried on bad teams?
Yeah, it happens all the time. Greatest seasons I've ever seen from a running back was Adrian Peterson when he went over 2,000 yards and was the MVP of this league. And I saw him convert 3rd and 8 running the football. Hey, as much as I like Saquon Barkley, he's never going to be that guy. And that guy, that team won 11 games. They made the playoffs, and they were one and done. Yeah, I mean, the value of the position, even playing it at that level, one of the most historic seasons of all time, that's your limit if you don't have the answer at quarterback.
Hey, you can make an argument that right now, John, that Barkley is a top, 5 running back in the league, and Ezekiel Elliott is right there with them, and they may be on 2 of the bottom 5 teams in the league.
Well, you can also look at it another way. I'll give you this. I think everyone looks at the Los Angeles Rams and says that's the top contender to be a Super Bowl participant, at least on the NFC side. I think most people agree with that. I think most people will agree that Todd Gurley, as a football player, is better than Jared Goff. But who would be the more impactful loss if you could imagine one of those 2 guys being out for the season?
Right.
Not even close. It's not even close.
The Giants fall to 1-5. The Eagles improved to 3-3. It's amazing how things are different. Now, did we see enough last night from Philly? Did they resemble the 17 bunch enough to say, because we were talking about the other day, let's see where they can find a spot on this schedule to get a 3-game win streak somewhere to start feeling good. Do you look at that game last night? You got 10 days here. Do you feel pretty confident that this team righted the ship last night and is about to rip off a few?
Well, I think when I look at this team, I look at that game and said they did what they had to do, and they deserve credit for it. And they really put a period on it, an emphatic statement on handing a bad team a bad loss from their perspective, the Giants' perspective. I think this is the game coming up. Mm-hmm. This game will tell us something. I think if the Eagles go out and remember, it's a home game at Lincoln Financial Field, so
remember they went down on a Thursday night and beat this team. Not that that really carries, but they did play as recently as last year.
Yeah, and that was a Thursday. That's a difficult trip. That's far more difficult than last night.
Great defense.
Going down to Carolina and winning that game, that was a big win for them. I think this is a big game for them. Carolina's a good team. They're not a great team. I think they're a playoff-level team. So I think it says something. If they're able to play a clean game and they're able to win that by 10 points or 11 points and really going away, I think that all of a sudden that says this team might be back. But if it all evaporates and they play poorly again, then you look back at this Giants game and say, well, they just beat up on a bad team.
Yep. All right, we'll have that game, of course, next Sunday at 1 o'clock right here on 97.3 ESPN. And the Eagles take on the Panthers. And then they go to London to take on the Jaguars. and we'll see where they stand in a couple of weeks. And, of course, you can hear all those games right here on 97.3 ESPN. So the Eagles win. All is right for at least a weekend. You got the Sundays to yourself. What are you going to do with yourself on Sunday, John?
All is well. Hey, usually I would watch football, but I don't know if I want to watch football, the product, but I probably will.
All right, John's back on Monday with more on the NFL and the Eagles, of course, always making news. Thanks, pal.
Hey, thank you, guys.
John McMullen, like all guests, appear via the Boardwalk on the Hotline.